All right, we are live and alive. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live event. Today, we are talking about the limited partner perspective, how we evaluate first time funds. Episode 1, first time fund managers versus the harsh reality of capital raising. I was just thinking about this anecdote. LP and GP have lunch. LP orders a salad, GP orders steak, and tries to metaphorically convince LP for high risk, high stake, and high reward. Please, have you heard that? Okay, great. So I think that we set up the premise. Now let's picture all the main characters. My name is Ginia Hasis. I'm the founder of Multipliers, and our main goal in the company is to introduce the right GP to right LP in order for them to get married and live happily ever after, but hopefully not longer than 7 more years. I'm here with my favorite guest, Christopher O, entrepreneur and investor, and my very, very good friend. Chris, I want you to introduce yourself right now and to share how your expertise is relevant to our today's topic of the conversation.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. My name's Chris. I started off career-wise as an engineer by training. I used to build technologies for governments, militaries, and then my first time on the investing side was also for the government, where I invested about 20 billion a year into technology aspects, evaluating new technologies in the dual-use defense type space. After that, I helped a US company expand globally. I helped them look at Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And then I led their Asia expansion and operations for a few years, primarily in the public sector side of the house. After that, I started up my own company in cybersecurity. It was a dark web cyber threat intelligence company, and then also started another company just in tech consulting. From there, I started helping more VCs do technical evaluations, look at business models, and then I also started helping quite a few family offices. I still work a lot with family offices, helping them understand kind of their engagement on the investment journey as they look at it from there. Personally, I've invested directly into companies, but now I personally invest more into funds, and I advise a lot of families to look at that as well. But usually that's a conversation with individual families. So that's my background.
Great. Super grateful that you joined us today, and I hope that our listeners also will get the idea and understand how lucky you are to have you today. So now I want to talk through some rules today. And I already see that some people are already sending us messages. Guys, please use the chat, send us where you're listening to us today, and also ask questions. Also, the next thing is we're going to talk about how, like, the LP perspective, the actual topic of the conversation today for the next 30 minutes. And then after that, I will open this session for Q&A. And I've already chosen 3 victims, 3 GPs, who are the most active during the marketing campaign of the webinar. And they will share the stage today with us live and get all the attention of the audience, share the thesis, and get the feedback, which is great. And also, we have several announcements, and I hope that you will listen to us to the very end. And spoiler, we're not gifting iPhones the 17th. And also, maybe if we will run over the time, we will still answer every single question. Maybe it will be in the form of article, or maybe we will run another webinar. And definitely send us DMs. I know that Chris really loves answering every single question through LinkedIn. And I think that we are ready, right? So let's start with probably the most painful question to every single GP. Picture this. You're you're a second-time GP. First fund you raised from family and friends, and everything was great. And by fund 2, you haven't distributed proceeds from fund 1. And right now you're raising from extended circle. So from friends of friends, sometimes using cold outreach. And here comes the reality check. Nobody is writing a check. The question is, what is holding them back? And then most importantly, how to break this pattern. Chris?
I mean, I think the concept is a matter of you have to sometimes get a little bit more in depth with your LP conversations. The idea of being able to share where your actual portfolio companies are at. They might not have exited, but it doesn't mean they're not real companies. Talking about the revenue that those underlying companies are generated, their growth rates, being able to talk through that and actually explain your portfolio, I think is a great way to approach that. The LPs that are only looking for a number, very bluntly, you might not get them because they want to see a DPI before they're investing. But for the LPs that are really looking at that asset class of venture capital and understand it a little bit more, they understand that sometimes it takes quite a while to actually really see some meaningful DPI. So then really sharing about what those portfolio companies are doing, why you're excited about them, where their growth is. It also shows that you as a GP actually are more involved in your portfolio as opposed to just a check then runs away.
Oh, that's great. So I actually also wanted to ask about the mistakes that usually GPs are making. And just because you help me sometimes to polish pitch decks of clients of multipliers, my question will be, what is the typical mistakes they are doing?
I think from an LP perspective, I wouldn't say necessarily that there's one glaring mistake that everybody makes. But I would say when I look at decks, when I'm looking at it, whether it's helping you or whether it's helping some of my friends that are family offices that are looking to possibly invest, the main thing I look for is idiosyncrasies where things don't align, right? Where a message says, we're operating in, let's say, a smaller market and we're raising a $200 million fund and we're investing into pre-seed deals. Well, there's not enough deals to even invest into at pre-seed, with that type of capital. So there has to be alignment from that aspects. I think the other aspect that I always want to really understand is how is a VC sourcing, right? Because the main reason from an LP's perspective that I'm not doing it myself directly, it's not just their vision, their wisdom, understanding that vertical, right? Because some VCs are generalists, some VCs are specialists. We can have a whole separate debate on that. Both have our benefits, both have drawbacks. But with the idea of the concept of why am I choosing that VC, it's often because of their proprietary network, proprietary deal flow, and proprietary access, right? So can you get into a good deal? Can you get onto that cap table, that good deal, right? So I think that's one of the areas where I really want to understand when I look at a new deck is what is their access and, how do they have some differentiation there?
Sometimes they also make mistakes in numbers, right? And we also had a couple of great cases.
Yeah, there's some times where people mess up the numbers, but I guess I think that I connect that more with that first one of misalignment, right? The concept of like if they haven't really done their math and they go like, okay, well, we're going to invest $200 million into small market X, right? Like how are they going to do that, right? Thinking about that from that perspective, I think that's where those kind of numbers don't really line up.
Mm-hmm.
So, usually it's not the numbers from a perspective like just a ridiculous management fee or a ridiculous carry. Most people are pretty standard for the most part.
Yeah, so I really wanted to talk about this first, but right now I want to switch gears and look through LP lens, right? Because this is the topic of our conversation. And there will be 3 different questions on that. But right now, imagine you're a family office from Saudi Arabia. Obviously, every single venture capital fund is pitching you. And the question is, what would your decision-making process would look like?
I think part of it's the idea of like which funds are getting me into markets and verticals that I don't necessarily have access to. I think the idea of trying, if I'm a family office in Saudi, I'm trying to probably build a portfolio of managers I'm investing with, not just one, not just two, right? But how am I building up my portfolio of managers? The idea of a family office in Saudi being able to invest deal by deal from afar without fund managers sharing their deal flow, a little bit challenging to do, right? Even the folks that really want to be direct deal specific, they need that source engine, and usually co-investing with funds is a good way to do that. So I think that's probably one of the main things that I'm looking at from a fund. From a family office perspective, is who are the managers that have a thesis that I want to back and support, and then who are the people I actually get along with, right? I think the getting along with the personality aspects, I think is a really big deal. One of the oldest jokes, right, around GPs and LPs, forgive this pun, but like GP says, like, what are you supposed to do to treat LPs? And they said, treat them like mushrooms, right? And that's feed them poop and keep them in the dark, right? So the concept is a matter of, there's a lot of GPs that just want to raise capital and go away and do their thing and say, don't bother me, I'm making you money. That's really the wrong mindset, right? The mindset is, it really is general partner and limited partner, right? You are partners in this endeavor. And when you're partners in this endeavor, it's a matter of, for a lot of times, a lot of those LPs, like this, figurative Saudi family office, I might be wanting to invest into that GP because I want to be able to invest into the follow-ons or co-invest at the same time as the funds. So I think that partnership is an important aspect. I think the other thing that a lot of GPs ignore from a partnership standpoint too, is those LPs actually can provide a lot of strategic value to their portfolio companies. When those portfolio companies want to enter into a new market, when they're looking for a different customer, right? Those LPs sometimes own the companies that they actually want to be partners with, right? Or know the people that do. So I think those are some considerations.
I'm also thinking that probably just because of the cultural difference, maybe for some people to be partners, it's not very easy, right? And maybe my follow-up question will be how to adapt to local culture. Let's say if you're American GP and then you're raising from Saudi family office.
So I think the concept is that there is cultural differences, certainly, right? I think the idea, you hear from both sides, right? In Asia and in the Middle East, right? We talk about, oh, we're very relationship oriented. But then in the US, we're like, well, we're also relationship oriented. And maybe, people get sensitive about like who's more relationship oriented, and it kind of sounds silly, right? I would say, though, that there is an aspect of building trust, building relationships. To put it in context, though, for, let's say, a lot of the Western European and North American GPs or individuals on this call, I would say in a lot of those places, we do have a lot of, for lack of better words, trust and reliance on the legal system. Was just at an event this past weekend where somebody was talking about how upset they were about what happened, and they're actually going to litigate. And they actually can. I'm not saying that's always the best way to go, but you can at least do that. The idea that if you're going to work in some of the other markets around the world, litigation might not be your best option, right? It might be better to have good partners that can really protect your interests out there and stuff like that. So having that relationship really matters. And so I think that concept of building up that relationship takes time. So it's not usually so transactional as like, I'm going to just fly over to Riyadh or Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Doha, and after one meeting, they're going to hear how smart I am and how great my thesis is, and they're going to invest. It takes time. It takes kind of coming back to the region a little more consistently, building up those relationships, letting them know that you're actually going to be there in the long run. So I think that's important.
And how is it different from, let's say, institutional LPs? Everyone wants to raise from Mubadala, let's say, right? And how do you make this relationship work?
Well, I think with the institutional LPs, one is a lot of those have offices in Silicon Valley, in London, in New York, right? And so I think there is an aspect where they do already have teams out in those places. So I think that's one aspect where they've already, for lack of better words, decided to engage from that aspect. I think that just the concept of their portfolio construction, when you're talking about the large sovereign wealth funds, is they're investing into so many, right? So it's not the family office that's investing into a half a dozen, and you're trying to convince them that you're the right GP to work with and back and have a relationship with like a Mubadala or something like that. They're investing into so many, right, that it's like you have to check some criteria, fit into some of their categories, some of their investment thesis, but it's, I wouldn't use the word transactional, but like they are going to probably, they have so many fund managers, they're not going to be calling you every month, because that's just, they're going to be tracking your quarterlies, and then they're going to be hopefully coming to your AGMs, and that's kind of how they will get involved. So.
I also want to highlight one of our friends, Richard, and ask the question that also relates to that. Because sometimes, let's say, if you raised Fund 1, you had one thesis, and then you decided to change it. Let's say Fund 2 has different thesis, And then also sometimes managers also, let's say, add other partners or different managers. And the question is that how do you as LP understand that these fund managers actually did like all the homework, understood that, okay, so those were mistakes, we want to change it. What are the criteria and how do they really understand that the fund two will be better?
Well, I think when they change their investment thesis, going from one to another, right? There is an aspect of actually I see Williams on the call as well, and he talks about the over communicating. I'll re-emphasize that again, right? I think the concept is a matter of when you have a GP that is changing their thesis, it is going to be a time where you have to over communicate to your LPs, right? Why did you change this thesis? What happened in the market? What were the, what changed macro-wise? What changed micro-wise, right? If you are investing into AI LLMs right now, right, and you go, wow, it's massively overvalued. We don't think we should play there anymore. We think we should do SLMs. We think we should do fill in the blank. And if that's your thesis and how it's pivoted, there is an aspect where you're able to share that thesis with people, right? And then you're getting other people to buy into it. I kind of say the same thing with startups and with funds in general. When you're talking to a potential investor, what you're really sharing are all of your assumptions. You're sharing all of your thesis, all of your assumptions, and you're basically allowing them to ask questions about those assumptions, pick at it a little bit, and you're kind of defending it, not in a protective way, but you're kind of saying, this is why I think this. You have that question, let me answer that question. And when you've removed all of their questions, right, and they also believe in all your assumptions, then it's the concept of like, are you the person they want to back because we agree with all those assumptions? So I think that over communicating is really important.
And also, I think that the approach in fundraising should be different, right? And maybe they also approach investor relations differently than first timers.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really important, I guess, I would say, actually, going back to the family office versus institutionals. Institutionals might disagree with me on this a little bit more, but I would say with family offices, the idea that if any GP listening to this, I would say this: if you think you're going to hire an IR person and that person's just going to take care of things for you, that's just not the case, right? IR people are fantastic; they're super important, but what they're doing is helping to coordinate that schedule of how you want to engage with all those different potential LPs, right? Family offices, institutionals, everything like that. But even though you might have been hiring them onto your team because of all the relationships they've had, all the capital they've raised for Sequoia or fill in the blank, right? The idea is that they're the ones that help to coordinate it with it. But as a family office, right, we want to know the GPs. We want to know the people who are investing in, the partners that are making the investment decisions. Sometimes it's because we want to call them and be like, I invested with the fund. My uncle invested with the same fund, and when DeepSeek came out, right, my uncle called me up and basically just asked me, how does this impact our investment, right? They want to understand those type of things, right? And they want to be able to call the GP and answer that, right? I have very good relationships with the GP that I invested with, so I was able to answer him very quickly, right? So his nerves were at ease for all intents and purposes. But I think that aspect of having that relationship with the GP is super important. With the institutionals, they still want to know the GPs, right? But every single interaction, they realize it's not going to always be with the GPs, right? There will be an IR person maybe helping filter some of those questions, because a lot of the times those sovereigns are, pulling criteria consistently for their ongoing reporting, right? Because they have a massive their own IC. But with the family office side, tends to be a lot more. They want to be able to call the GP. So.
By the way, does it make any difference for LP, whether it's investor relations or it's a placement agent or it's a investment banker?
That's a great question. I think that's going to be a little bit personal, family office by family office, kind of the interactions they've had, like good or bad. I would say most of the time that's why they want to know the GP, because the GP is never leaving, right? Even when you have an IR person that's an internal team member, if they leave for whatever reason, right, their economic interests are not tied up with the funds. Whereas that GP had a GP commit, typically, right? Most GPs will always have a GP commit, or most LPs won't invest. So they have their own capital tied up in the fund. They can't just walk away, right? From an investment bank aspect or a placement agent, right? They're obviously a service provider for that. So they are not connected to that. But that's still okay. So I'm not knocking investment banks or service providers. They provide a real service there in the sense of they're connecting people that would have never met beforehand, right? So they make that introductions, but again, that relationship needs to transition over to the GP, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And probably the last question here. I know that sometimes GP are also trying to understand whether they hire this person, like investor relations, whatever, during the first close or the second. Do they also, yeah, can you comment on that?
So back to the idea of what you expect that investment relationships person to do. If you expect them to raise capital, like aside from you, I don't think that's ever really that really reasonable, unless you're huge name, multi-billion-dollar assets. Like I always find it hilarious when a small fund hires somebody that was an IR person for Sequoia or KKR or something like that, because you're like, did they really raise that money themselves? Did they pitch it so well? Or is it just a name KKR and then that, strategic LP is like, yeah, I want access to KKR's next fund, right? So the idea that an IR person says like, oh, well, I've raised billions before, I know how to raise. I'm not saying they don't, but the idea that they're going to go raise it without the GP being involved is, I think, just fantasy. I think the idea that that person, when you hire them, they are helping to coordinate your investment raising strategy, right? So especially as a newer GP, you might not actually have relationships in the Middle East, relationships in Asia, relationships outside of your own network. So hiring somebody that has those relationships, whether it's a placement agent, whether it's an investment bank, whether it's an IR person, you're hiring them internally, but they have experience in those places. I think all those things are beneficial. The way I think of it personally is when you can afford an internal investment relations person, they're the ones that help coordinating your overall strategy from that aspect. But usually that one person that you hire typically doesn't have a lot of global expertise, right? They'll typically have expertise in one area. So that's why I kind of like the idea of like when you go with like a placement agent route, the placement agents really understand specific regions and areas and specific networks from that perspective. And so when they kind of take those people to those areas, they already have the relationships there, right? So an IR person that was at formerly at Sequoia that joins another Silicon Valley VC, they might know who Mubadala is, but do they really know who to call? Do they really know who's at Sanibel? Do they really know who's at Family Office X, right? That sort of thing. So I think that's maybe a differentiation between those different types of similar functions but different roles.
Mm-hmm. I think that we don't have enough questions in the chat, first of all. And then second, I really want to give the opportunity right now to these funds that I mentioned to talk to you and also benefit from your expertise. And then I think that the first person who I want to call on stage will be Nick. And I know Nick for quite a while, actually, probably maybe for 10 years, honestly. And then he was the person who participated every single conference on artificial intelligence years ago in Europe. And he sold a couple of companies to Facebook and Google. And then he's super successful VC. And I really want to just right now, Nick, you to present your thesis, the thesis of your new fund.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Nick, it's a pleasure to meet you. I think one of the things we want to kind of kick off with here, because we don't have that much time, but would love for you to do an elevator pitch. So literally, if you're in the bottom lobby of the Burj Khalifa and you're about to take that elevator up to the top restaurant, grab a coffee, right? And you just happen to be in that elevator with somebody that you think might be of interest. Could you share your elevator pitch of DVC, please?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Jenja. That was super easy to be in every possible AI conference in Europe 10 years ago because there was like 3. So, yeah, my wife and I have been working together for 18 years, started multiple companies, multiple funds. Our first fund, 120 mil under management, we returned 6 times. So quite successful. Our second fund was an arbitrage business, returned 2.5 times, but that was tuned for like smaller risk, smaller return. Yeah, a couple of exits. So we've been doing AI for the last 12 years, ever since 13 now. AlexNet was published 13 years ago. That's crazy. And we've been, one of the early ones to believe that every company will be AI company or out of business company quite soon. We were a little bit too early. Now I think it's the time finally. So over the years, we've collected a pretty good network and expertise. We're both founders, both technical. We have 3 more partners, all founders, all technical, all in AI. And we started our first fund about 4 years ago in this new paradigm where it's a collective of 165 engineers. So you collect 165 engineers who can invest as angels who are in AI, like researchers from OpenAI, Anthropic, pretty much like every frontier lab there is. I'm probably just missing SSI. Every big tech corporation, you get a lot of insight, you get access to the best pipeline, and most importantly, you get access to helping companies the most. And since returns in VC are Pareto distributed, or maybe like 5% deals return 95% of the money, we figured we want to be the most competitive fund. So wanted to invest as early as possible, want to be in deals with Sequoia, like every top tier firm. And over 4 years, I think we've built it. Our current seed fund is about 2.24 TVPI, with a couple of companies you might have heard of, like Perplexity AI, or Edged AI, or Thinking Machines. These are just 3 unicorns, and probably 30 more are doing like crazy good.
So you bring a lot of the engineering talent to your evaluations, and you have an entire network of people to help you with that diligence aspect. And you've already done it at the pre-seed side of the house, and now you have a portfolio, right? So now now you're launching the current DVC fund, right, which is your fund 2, but it's your first on the kind of Series A, seed Series
first
A.
institutional one under this brand, because the seed fund's exclusive to technical angels. This is institution plus technical angels, because we have a few technical founders of unicorns, like Perplexity founders invested back in the fund. And just to give you an example, through our network, we're not only able to find Perplexity on seed, but we also hired 16 people for them and sold 2 companies to them in the first year after our investment because of the network.
That makes sense. So you're using them from a sourcing perspective as well as an evaluation perspective, right? So we talked about a little bit of that diligence.
Good engineers know good engineers.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna start asking you some questions because the ride on the elevator is not that long. So when you invest right now with angel checks, right? How does that? Did you already from that first fund? Do you have kind of super pro rata rights? How do you kind of take advantage of that with the other?
About 30% of the deals we get formal pro rata, but most of the deals we invest more in building relationships. So we automated all of the chores. Like we do due diligence even before the first call. So like we don't have to spend time on that. We actually fired like our last analyst 2 years ago, but we have 2 engineers and 2 product people on staff as a small VC firm. And we try to focus on building human relationships with founders, be on their side of the table. So they call us and say, hey, we want like more of your money.
Gotcha. So 30% you have formal pro rata. The rest of it is based on relationship building, but you really emphasize that in the aspects. How do you build up shares in those portfolio companies? Where do you see that like decision point? They're gaining traction. What type of traction are you looking for where you decide to put more money in? Whether that's
this is algorithmic. We basically ingest all of their updates, all of the data we can find online or through like paid sources. We track about 220 different data types and data points per company. And basically our algorithm tells us when the company is about to raise an oversubscribed round. And then we look at it and we try to evaluate like whether it's everything all right in the team, whether the founders are still, focused and motivated, and then spend a little bit more time with them, and then we offer them a check. So we wanted to preempt their Series A before their evaluation spoiled by Andreessen or Lightspeed.
Gotcha.
And that provides pretty good, like our new fund, even though it's like 4 months old, it's already at 3x TVPI.
Gotcha. So you try to preempt it, but so you try to look at internal numbers from regaining traction, but there's not a specific number that you're looking at.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned, and I've looked through your deck already before. You mentioned you're an AI agent enabled firm, right? So I'll share this slide for the audience to be able to see, right? So you actually use AI agents to kind of help you in that process to reduce your overall headcount and also increase your efficiency, right? Because of the speed of execution of some of these. So this is part of the tools that you use to be able to track those companies. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So we're building like a full stack of everything that like a small VC or an angel needs to invest, and with the same level of information and insight as Andreessen would.
So you look at it as who you're replacing or what functions you're replacing.
Everything that is not building relationships.
Everything that's not building relationships. I love that. Does this lead to part of your investment thesis as well? Like, how do you look at companies that already have AI agents embedded in them and themselves from an efficiency standpoint? Or do you see it as an opportunity to help those portfolio companies build more efficiencies by helping them build AI agents? How do you look at
Well, 100% of our portfolio and companies we seriously consider investing are AI native, which means that if they, for some reason, do not use AI agents somewhere, it's a very peculiar question why. Maybe just like AI doesn't work for that type of work. But what we do just helps us understand better the modern stack of technologies. Roughly like 25% of our portfolio is developer tools and AI infra. And we are users of that, so we know exactly how well someone's doing. And like a lot of times we get tipped by our LPs, like somebody says, hey, we at OpenAI are starting to implement this thing, you should talk to its founders, it's a startup. And like we go and talk to them, and then we start using them, and like as customers we see exactly what they're doing and how, and then like we are able to write a check.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick, so I just have 2 more quick questions. Can you briefly explain DVC's seed fund? Just give us maybe like literally the 10-second highlights on this, because I know that's part of your deal sourcing for this follow-on fund. Can you share a little bit about that?
So 166 LPs. We write very small checks. So we want to like be seen as an angel on the founder's side, like 100, 200, 300K checks into pre-seed and seed, alongside top tier firms, or a lot of times before them. And we write about 10 checks per quarter. So there's 120 something companies in the portfolio right now. And they seem to be very well funded. The single most important criteria we have in this fund is this repeat founders only. So this is very competitive on early stage, but allows us to get into really cool hot deals.
That sounds great. So I see Genia coming back up here. So she's about to pull us with the little, hook stage left. But maybe the very, very quick last question is, how do you work with LPs right now that want to co-invest with you or invest follow-on? Can you take 5 seconds?
Sure. So we don't do follow-ons from the new fund on purpose, because that's the request from our anchor LPs and other LPs. They all want to do like direct deals, Series B and later. And they feel comfortable there. We don't feel comfortable on Series B. It's way too late. Companies are way too big for us to have fun. So we just pass this along. And if like one LP and just one LP pinged me about the company and said, hey, we want to invest in them, I'll just connect them directly. But if there's like 3 or more, we might do a vehicle, like no fees vehicle, just for the company to maintain the same brand on the thing. And then like we'll do proportional, like whatever we can get for our LPs. And now we just like pass on pro rata to them.
Sounds great. Hey, Nick, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was great showcase how LPs evaluate GPs, but also I think that for startup founders who are listening us today, I just want to mention that Nick has his own secret because he has really very good network of corporate people in America, in every single corporate. And I think it really helps a lot for a portfolio. And this is one of the values that fund usually provides for startup founders. Great. So the next person who I want to invite on stage is Tristan. And I specifically want to highlight that he's a first-time fund manager, but I really like his thesis. I think to target this industry with a fund one, this is super ambitious. And I'm definitely wish you all the luck. And the floor is yours. Please present.
Yep. So Tristan, same thing. You're at the lobby of the Burj Khalifa, taking the elevator up. Please give us an elevator pitch. Share how you position Solaris.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Great to see such a turnout. So typically when I mention Solaris Ventures, there's two questions that come into LP's mind. One is why space, and two, why Solaris? So I'll start with the first. So space is, I mean, we all have some concept and some image in our mind when we say the word, right? Big, expensive, delicate, explosive things. It's full of innovation. It has high cost to entry, and everything is inherently new. So basically, every single dollar you can save with technological process or new materials and have you can unlock millions of dollars in value. We see it with the billions of dollars that are spent each year on launch, on observation, communications, and things like that, and how much our daily lives actually depend on space. So think of it as like high barriers to entry, but if you can make marginal improvements, it's actually an incredibly exciting place to be. Also, it's very relevant. So given the geopolitical situation we find ourselves in, and the fact that every major economy wants to have their own space resources and launch capabilities, intelligence, things like that, there's also quite an interesting geopolitical angle to play within space. And the other thing is, the space ecosystem is kind of has different sides to the same coin. So for example, even though it is capital intensive, you can unlock huge value with just incremental improvements. And the markets also become self-reinforcing. So we're seeing dramatic lowering of launch costs, which unlocks entirely new business models that nobody thought were possible. So now moving on to why Solaris. I worked at a couple of generalist VC funds before this. I also have an engineering background, so I was able to kind of understand some of the challenges that the founders were purporting to solve. And actually, having moved my generalist portfolio into the direction of space, doing a number of space investments over the past few years, I realized the network effect was super strong in space, more so than any other area that I had invested in. Everybody knows each other, all of the VC firms. There is competition for good deals, but because it's so hard for a generalist firm to wrap their heads around, for example, it takes a long time for great startups, even the best ones, to close their rounds. So it means that there's a very collaborative nature within the space ecosystem. And during my time investing in some of the early stage companies, I built out a great network of top tier seed and pre-seed firms. And so I'm positioning Solaris Ventures at the Series A level. We do Series A as our core investment to basically be the next educated or informed investor after your seed round. And so basically, just having been in the ecosystem for a number of years, we've just gotten the feedback from other VCs and founders that, hey, once we reach Series A, it's just hard to get generalist investors on board, because even though they might be in theory excited about space, they really have trouble picking apart the tech risk from the business model risk, the market risk. And I can get into these things in more detail, but basically it's a lot of effort. And so just being around the space, there's a lot of puns I can use here, but basically being in the sector for long enough just gives you a huge advantage, and founders really appreciate when you can understand what they're trying to solve. Basically that's why I'm starting Solaris.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Tristan, for sharing that. Maybe I'll just start going to some of the questions. I've gone through your deck, and on this one of the first slides, you talk about proven markets here in investing in space. Can you explain what you mean about that? Because venture is typically about novel areas and new models, right? I think you kind of went that a little bit into your intro, but like an incremental weight reduction in space is a massively different business opportunity in space, right? Because it costs so much to launch. So how do you look at that balance between proven market and opportunity?
Exactly. And just as everyone can guess, we don't just invest in the proven market side of space, but it is reassuring to some of our LPs to know that we're actually investing into businesses where there's already hundreds of millions of dollars changing hands every year. Things like launch, things like communication, where basically, private companies and governments have been buying launch slots for over 2 decades now from private providers, not just SpaceX. There are other people out there. And also in terms of communications and GPS markets, those are very proven, deep markets. And so if you can basically, as you mentioned, for example, weight and mass, for example, radiation shielding, if there's a way to, one of the startups we're talking to is creating like a new engineered radiation shielding for your electronic components, which every satellite needs. If you can reduce that mass by an order of magnitude, then everyone's going to be your customer. To get there, you need to prove flight heritage and do some lab testing. It does take time, but that's what I mean when I talk about proven markets. There are already dollars flowing, and in that case, you're taking maybe more of a tech risk rather than a market risk. And I can talk a little bit about the different types of risk inherent in space, but that's what I mean when I say proven markets.
Gotcha, understood. And so how much of that stuff goes towards government customers versus commercial customers? And I think one of the interesting things about space in a good / bad way, right, is that governments are always a slow sales cycle, right? But in space, even some of that is also a pretty slow sales cycle too, because of, like you said, flight worthiness and getting things approved. So how do you deal with that slower customer cycle for your portfolio companies?
So first of all, thankfully, they're kind of dealing with it themselves. And I say that because we are coming from basically a model where the government buys everything, orchestrates everything, and kind of micromanages everything, to where they see themselves as being the end customer. And so they give out contracts to increasing number of small businesses who can compete with the big boys. And oftentimes, maybe it's a bit pro forma, but oftentimes they really do want to see multiple solutions, and the small guys can move faster. And so they're appreciating that to get the best solution, they basically need to have as many people bid on project as possible. And the second point they're dealing it with themselves is that they've realized, hey, we can't just write this $10 million contract and fund them upon delivery. They need that money up front in order to actually build and test this product. And so we're seeing new contract vehicles emerging that kind of align to that capital expenditure need. The final point I'd say is the startup founders and the VCs really need to be ahead of the curve in understanding what the government wants. So for example, Space Force basically puts together events where they basically showcase the technical challenges they're up against and say, hey, if you can bring something into the table, we will buy this, and here's the contracts we're going to use to do so.
Okay, so you're doing a lot of early engagement with the customers even beforehand, and then it also helps de-risk for you from an investment standpoint, right? You kind of see where that's going. So with the next question is, you're planning on leading with a $4 million check, right? But your opening slide, this slide talks about $5 to $10 million per company. In the $5 to $10 million per company, that's taking advantage of that pro rata and that super pro rata rights. Is that accurate? That's how you're building up those shares in those companies?
Absolutely. And this is just an average. And this comes from my investment experience of build relationships early on, get things like information rights, go to their events, do the factory floor visits. This is super important when you're dealing with hardware. You have to see what's actually going on in the company. And because there's a super collaborative nature, as I mentioned, founders are actually willing to take smaller checks from dedicated, educated investors in the space in order to build those relationships. So this is not a difficult thing for us to do, but we believe where we come in is really around the Series A, when the generalist funds might get cold feet or not really know what they're dealing with, even though they have the money to spend. And so that's how we sort of build our position slowly over time and build more and more conviction as we go along.
And you mentioned earlier you have an engineering background, so that's part of the aspect of the technical due diligence and feasibility is one of the areas where you really focus on and differentiate yourself as a specialist fund. And then you also mentioned kind of the operational needs due diligence, that risk assessment is actually by working with the government and the customers already to knowing what they need. So it's not a question mark about whether or not that's a real need. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. The technical side. So, I was a draftsman, design engineer, so not aerospace, but basically what I've learned is you can segment the technological risk into different types of technology. For example, there's an electromagnetic launch company we've invested in, Auriga Space. They're a combination of, rail guns, vacuum tubes, superconducting electromagnetics, and you really kind of need to pick apart these technological risks to understand them better. And of course, you can never dilute them away to zero, but you can basically get a better understanding what you're dealing with once you understand what the technology is actually built upon. And that might not be your thing. Maybe you want to take more of a business or execution risk rather than a technological risk. There's different ways to play it in space. And then with the government, yes, it is just about sort of understanding what their needs are at any point in time. And they're not always reliable in communicating this, but once they do, it's actually pretty simple to bid on the contract. And then all you have to do is sort of manage your expectations and also expenditures on the way to wait until you get the contract. And then after that point in time, it actually becomes a bit easy because, again, they're starting to do milestone payments. They're starting to kind of hold your hand a little bit more and appreciate that, hey, we can't buy a product if the company's not around to deliver the product because they haven't gotten their money up front, things like that.
It's been interesting to see some of the different governments, how they've changed that. The U.S. has really advanced that quite well in the last about 2 decades, but then there's other countries that make it still hard. I think maybe we kind of, I see Jeannie again, so maybe our final question before we get the hook is how do you look at exits in the space vertical, right? So how do you look at your portfolio companies from an exit aspect? Do you think that's an IPO aspect, or is that more trade sale? Do you think it's going to be bought by one of the majors, a defense player? How do you look at that?
I'd say M&A is still probably the biggest path. I mean, even the largest space company, SpaceX, they're still privately held. They haven't IPO'd. There have been a number of interesting IPOs recently, but it's really quite a small market at this point. Basically, once you reach a certain TRL level, technical readiness level, so you've gotten flight heritage and you've got a large order book, that's when you can approach your major prime and sell if they haven't approached you already, or they're not already on your cap table and are trying to steal their technology from you so that they can build it themselves, which we've seen happen a number of times. But basically, it's about getting flight heritage, testing it, showing that it actually does what it can in space, in its natural environment. And then basically, that's where a huge value unlock and the valuation step up comes. And that's where we hope to generate the most of our returns before an exit.
So that's great. And for anybody that's on the call, right, the idea of IPO versus trade sale or acquisition, a lot of news goes around IPOs because it's sexy, right, listing on the exchange or whatnot. But very bluntly, from my perspective, trade sale is almost always a better way to go, right? It's so much cleaner. You don't have lockup, usually as from the investor side, from the LP side of the house. So it's a great way to go, especially because most of the bigs in the space and defense industries, the acquisition aspect is usually they have the budgets, for lack of better words. So, hey, Tristan, thanks so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was about to use a remove button. Yes, I actually see that there is a comment in our private chat, and I see that our GPs already started sharing pipelines between each other, which is great. I also see a lot of very interesting questions from our audience. And right now we have around 100 people listening to us, but I see just 7 questions. So guys, you can try better. And we have last GP today, Christian, and we met right before our event. We had a yacht event in May, and then we got acquainted with Christian, who is GP of Fund Hill. And I've heard about his fund from the biggest institutional LP in United Arab Emirates. And that made me very intrigued. So right now, yes, Christian, the floor is yours.
So Christian, same deal. You're on the elevator and the Burj. Please give us a pitch. Tell us a little about Hill Capital.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here and talk about Hill Capital. Hill Capital is an early stage venture capital fund investing in health tech startups across Europe. When I say health tech, we are really coming from the digital angle. So it's really digital plus platforms that we invest in, so no hardware. And we've been now starting Fund 2 since beginning of the year. Started Fund 1 in 2020 and have a pleasure to have really LPs that are institutional and also linked to healthcare. So big insurances, financial investors, and now for Fund 2, we're expanding our LP base and inviting new investors to join.
Thanks for sharing, Christian. How much have you raising? Because you talked about this is Fund 2 already, right? How much are you raising? How much have you raised already in Fund 2?
So Fund 2 is right now, it's signed commitments 105 million. We also started investing already, have done the first 2 investments. and we can go up to a maximum of 150. Target is to get beyond 120. Let's see how close we get to the target, but for us, it's really staying in our turf, in our field, and that's the money I think we are convinced that we can deploy useful.
Got you. And can you help us understand that a little bit when you say deploys? Because you're focused on the European theater, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of how do you look at deploying across Europe?
So we can invest all across Europe. When we started, we really looked in other industries, and just prospecting that came up with a thesis on our end. There's going to be one unicorn founder every year in health tech. And that's the one we're looking for, no matter where it's located in Europe. Very roughly from Fund 1, we have roughly 50% still allocated in Germany and 50% across Europe.
Gotcha. So with the Europe aspect, I've looked at your slides obviously as well, and looking at this aspect, you have so many different LPs. From your LP base is actually unique in the aspect that there's so many major players across all of Europe in the health tech space. So with that, are you able to help kind of your portfolio companies expand across Europe a little bit easier in any way? How does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as a healthcare specialist fund, like the feedback we get is that we understand where our founders want to go to. And I think that we also know what we don't know, and where we loop in people from our network to either support or also to do the due diligence. So just giving examples, traditionally we started from Germany. That's also where entrepreneurial we are coming from. And so in Fund 1, I think a huge support was really helping companies from outside Germany to tap into the German market in healthcare. And over the last 5 years, we expanded our network across Europe and looking at the specifics of healthcare. I think we are very strong in Germany. We have an understanding of the other markets, and we know who to ask in other markets. And I think on maybe tapping into the founders, I think the core question is always what's going to be the first or second market, and on those specifics we can support.
Gotcha. So you can really help your portfolio companies enter into different markets, right? I'm assuming that some of these strategics, the reason they invest with you is because they're looking at sourcing as well. So there are also potential strategic exits. Is that as well? Is that accurate?
Could be. Could be potentially. So there's different angles to it. Some of them have their own CVCs that might do follow-on rounds as well, or might be interested to see the landscape. For example, we had one of the LPs that joined just in Fund 2. We had a co-investment in Fund 1, and they realized we just have the bigger outlook and the better deal flow as a independent fund from our LP base. And seeing the insurances shown here, it's mostly coming from the asset managers. So traditional financial investments, that's also how we are set up. So there's no strategic angle to terms or the similar. What we do is we bring strategic insights to our LPs.
Gotcha. So there's not a forced function of exiting from that aspect, but there is like the awareness and relationship between those investors and the portfolio companies, so they can actually choose to invest. When you so that it's great that there's no forcing function from that standpoint. When you as a GP sitting on the cap table of some of your portfolio companies, right? How do you handle that situation if you're actually sitting on the cap table, part of their board possibly, and then there's an unsolicited offer or purchase from one of your LPs, right? You're now having to balance out the overall portfolio, right? When you're doing a price negotiation, right? How do you kind of handle that right now? Or have you had to handle that yet?
We have not had to handle that yet. So we will cross the bridge once we are there. The way we look at it is how to capture the best value from the company. That's also from an LP perspective, coming from the asset managers, the investments coming from the asset managers. So we will for sure have a look. Does it make sense, or is it better for the company to simply move forward?
Gotcha. Thank you. And maybe just kind of last two questions is, can you, I see United States is on here, you know, at third on the list for companies evaluated, but can you share a little bit more about that? Because I think we talked about it a little bit beforehand.
Yes. So so we get quite a lot of deal flow also from the US. For us, we're really focused on European founders and founders in Europe. So in principle, a pure US play we wouldn't invest in. Here, and what we see, a certain trend too is that we have also European companies incorporate as US Incs. That's also shown in the statistics here. And there might be, I mean, we have 20% that we can do rest of world basically, and then the fund. There might be opportunities also in terms of someone wants to come to Europe. Of course, we have to look on what's the valuation. Does that still match our fund model? So per se, we're really Europe focused. There might be exceptional cases like company in Europe incorporated as a US Inc. or with a specific access to Europe that they want to reach out and have as an investor.
Yeah, I think you just touched on one of my other questions, was the idea of if it is a US company that wants to come to Europe, if their valuations are maybe a little bit on the higher side, it might not fit into your portfolio theory. Is that accurate to say sometimes?
Yes. So on that one, I think that's one important thing when we started and ourselves coming from the entrepreneurial issues. Yeah, so we built businesses in the space before, and our vision is really to become the go-to fund for European founders. And that's why whoever interacts with us, we try to have a value add getting out of the conversation, even if you don't invest. So for that US company, one, I think in certain areas, US companies are quite mature. And there might also be an aspect of learning on our end about the US market as well. But two is also, and that's one thing our LPs are also interested, if we see a match that might not match our fund model, but there's a great product that might bring benefit, for example, for insurance, for the people at the insurance, for the insured people, then we connect there, of course, as well, to really bring healthcare forward.
That sounds great. Hey, Christian, I see Eugenia on the call. Maybe I think she's looking for one more slides. So one more question I did actually have is the when you're looking at the differing value expectations, when you're looking at the value expectations and the entering into different markets, how do you balance that out in different parts of Europe? I guess is there are there vastly different valuations in Germany versus fill in the blank other country?
So the valuation topic is a good one, and how valuation sensitive should we with the thesis of one unicorn founder per year.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also looking on the history on the last years, one front runner, if we look at the valuation we entered into, it's crazy. It was 2021, but still this is on the way to become a fund returner. Yeah. So the valuation topic, looking across the different countries, just to give some example, France with Paris in the lead. They have huge AI capabilities and a tendency that the valuation is a bit higher. At the same time, what you mostly buy in is quite some non-dilutive funding from the agency. So it's always kind of a balancing out. What does that mean? How far do they get into the next round? Do they get further than you would do in a country where you don't have that?
Gotcha. So some government support can really kind of offset some of those things from a risk profile perspective and how much you get. Well, Christian, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And I see Genia is about to give us the hook. So thank you again. Look forward to chatting more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. I think this is the time for some of the announcements that we prepared. And one of them is the announcement about the event that we are cooking together with Chris for December. And last time, Christian, you didn't have the opportunity to join us because it was short notice, but I hope that this time, December 5th, you will be with us in Abu Dhabi. So we have passion to introduce great people to each other, and especially if these people can work together. And in May, actually, we organized our first event together on a yacht in Dubai and introduced 5 GPs and 30 LPs to each other. And also we believe that happy people write checks. That's why this time we decided to elevate the experience for our network and to organize the event at Louvre Museum, Abu Dhabi. And the purpose of this event, obviously for general partners, to raise capital from family offices, to exchange contacts, and maybe receive the support to the portfolio of these funds. And last time, this is exactly how it happened. And we have a lot of different positive feedbacks from the event that are already organized. And today Richard was here, who participated in it. He's raising his fund to support technologies in Japan. And the way it will work this time, we only have 10 seats for GPs. And preferably it will be second-time GPs, or maybe sometimes even first-time GPs from different countries. And most of the 30 LPs will be from the region, but also some of them will be family offices from United States, and then maybe from Europe. And we want to organize the event where we can first get inspired by the atmosphere of Louvre, because it will be very beautiful. There will be an exhibition. And then after that, we have networking event, and we have several techniques how we want to matchmake GPs and LPs, because obviously we interview every single person who will be joining us, and then we identify the right match to every single GP by the criteria of investment focus of family office or institutional LP. And there will be a lot of entertainment. There will be also a puzzle. So every single GP should create the art with puzzle pieces, and then LPs will have these puzzle pieces. So it will be very, it's not like a pitching event. It will be a gamified event. And we have several price raises during this summer and autumn. So the price for one fund will be $20,000 starting from today, and the price will be until September 30th. And then we raise the price in end of October, and then the last will be end of November. But I hope that these 10 seats will be taken today. And for people who really like to make decisions fast, we want to share this discount for just 3 seats for $15,000 that will be taken today. And I'm absolutely sure that it will be taken. And you can send messages to me on LinkedIn and secure a spot, and also use my email, which is here on the slide. And I'm super excited about this event because obviously the yacht is great, but I think that nothing is better than the mix of cultural exchange and art, and then also networking. And I'm absolutely sure that that will be unforgettable.
Thanks for sharing that, Genia. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing that I just kind of would like to share with folks is something else that we're kind of building here. So if people can see the screen. So we're building the Apex Awards. The Apex Awards is an awards platform that's built around nominations. We want to recognize the individuals and organizations that go the extra step to supporting startups and truly lean into building startup ecosystems. The awards are not pay to play. They're a way for people to recognize angels, VCs, or LPs that have helped them build, operate, and connect. We're starting in the Middle East as the markets are all actively trying to grow their innovation ecosystems, but we want to recognize players that are leading the way. Please check out www.theapexaward.com when you get a chance, and nominate someone or some group that you feel exemplifies one of the 15 categories for this year's awards. We wanted to share about how the idea of building an ecosystem is more than just capital. Obviously, capital is very important, but we want to talk about the idea of how do we recognize the people that are really helping to build this. So please check out theapexaward.com, and would love to have more people nominated, and would love to share the winners with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to share actually the nominations that they will be there?
Well, there's here are some of the different. Well, sorry, from a category perspective, here there's Special Recognition Awards, Next Gen Leader Awards, Innovation Catalyst Awards, Resilience Awards, Leaders of Impact Awards, Ecosystem Visionary Award, an Ecosystem LP of the Year, Community Builder Award, Global Connector Award, Corporate Venture Partner of the Year, Founders Choice Award. And on the impact side is Impact Investor of the Year, Strategic Capital Award, Access and Opportunity Award, Sustainability and Climate Innovation Award, and Family Office Game Changer. So, and then on the performance side, Deal Maker, Portfolio Growth Champion, Exit of the Year, Angel Investor Excellence, Emerging Fund of the Year. Please check it out on the website. Go onto it, read each and every one, and nominate that person that really helped you as a startup. If you're a VC, though, help nominate the LPs that have actually helped you with more than just capital, right? Really, we want to showcase. We want this to be nominations. We don't want it to just be the pay-to-play type awards. So please join us.
I also think that probably some of the people right now are thinking, how can I get myself nominated? What should I do with that?
Well, you can find you a sponsor, right? So if you think you've done some really great things, right, and you've always, and you do think you contributed in that way, right? There's no shame in that, right? But please find somebody to nominate you, right? Who are the person that you helped? So if you did help somebody else, really, then that's great. But ask that person to nominate you, right? So we would love that.
I also see someone said, wow, such an amazing idea. I always wanted to visit that place. I think that Karim is talking about Louvre. Karim, you're very welcome. Chris, maybe you can also share who are the people at the yacht so that everyone have the idea what profiles, LPs, and family offices we had. And
we had family offices from kind of all around the Middle East, from different parts from Saudi flew in, from Abu Dhabi. We had folks obviously from Dubai because the event was in Dubai. We had a couple families from Bahrain, family from India, a couple from Europe, and we also had some very successful startup founders that were unicorn sort of exits. One from Asia as well. And a couple from the US, so kind of from everywhere.
Do we have an idea who will be in the Louvre event?
I would say probably a little bit similar. Maybe one or two more from Asia. Already had a couple others from the US, actually, and from Asia that'll come because there'll be a little bit more space, so we'll have a little bit more there. But we'll still also obviously probably have a very large Middle Eastern contingent.
Yeah, and also I think that we actually probably can share that a couple of them were from Forbes list, which is always nice. Nice to have. Great. I think that we are ready to take questions from the chat. And right now I see 9 questions. And Chris, do you have some suggestions? Where do you want to start with?
No, not necessarily.
Let's start with that.
Okay. At a high level, we focus on domain expertise, operational experience, and financial. What other areas are important for evaluating first-time funds? So I think, so if you look at the stats, right? I mean, I know Bill, right? Bill's super wise, but with the idea of first-time funds, statistically, first-time funds do really well. They outperform the funds that are on Fund 8, Fund 9, Fund 10, but usually because they're operating a smaller amount of capital, right? They are executing a specific thesis, and when you're executing that thesis, you can actually, push higher returns in general, right? Because it's just the diminishing marginal return on investment theses. But I would say with first-time funds, when you're evaluating them, the ideal scenario, in my opinion, I'll put what the family office hat on, is the idea of fund managers that are executing the same strategy that they have previously at another fund. They're just spinning out and doing it independently, right? So there's fund managers who have done this, whether that's VC, whether that's private credit, whether that's real estate, whatever it is, they've executed this strategy before and they know how to do it. So now the variable, like when we talk about risk profile perspective, is you're reducing that risk because they've executed before. You're just backing that new GP and doing it, right? Because they have whole different economics based on being an employee, or even if they were a partner level at another fund, stepping out and doing it independently. I think when there are, sometimes you'll see people that were a lot more junior at a fund, like maybe even an associate or senior associate stepping out and launching their own fund. They might not have had the full actual decision authority in that fund to execute those deals. So you're taking on more risk from that standpoint. But it's hard. So it's hard to know sometimes, like when they say, "Oh, well, I was really driving that part of the portfolio, even though my names weren't on them." Could be true, and that could be great, and you can find that diamond in the rough. I would say the bigger variable risk you have with that is they still don't know exactly how to execute a fund yet. They don't maybe have a full grasp on that whole portfolio theory aspect, or how they're going to do that. Maybe they were the sourcing engine, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they're just part of the evaluation and the criteria. But the reason why that fund was willing to get, why that company was willing to take the check was because of the previous fund's name. So I think there's a lot of variables on whether they can get into the deal or not. So I think those things are kind of a lot areas that I would care about, Bill. But I think the other thing that I would say is that you can see other things in their story that can mitigate that. What I mean by the story is, let's say that person is a senior associate. They were the one actually deal sourcing and evaluating, but maybe they don't really know how to actually operate the fund and portfolio construction. Well, maybe if they also went and became a Kaufman fellow, right, and Kaufman actually helped them understand kind of the, the mechanics behind that, maybe that's a way that you can see, okay, they worked on the academically areas where they might have a little bit more weakness, right? Or, in another fund where it's a matter of what is the composition of the GP? Maybe it's not a solo GP. That person that came out of consulting might really know how to help with those companies, or investment banking might really know how to help with those companies, but they might not be as much on the investment side, but another GP maybe can help balance that out. So I think those are some of the things that I would look at for first-time funds. And then I guess the other thing I would say is that first-time funds, I would rather see specialists instead of generalists first-time funds on my side, just because there can be strong arguments for generalist funds, doing really great. And there's plenty of the bigger exits right now were actually invested by generalist funds, but it's a concept of they're putting really big checks into lots of companies, right? And we can talk about that model another time. So, yeah.
I think that's exactly the example of all three GPs that were together with us today on stage.
Yeah. I think just the idea of like when you are an earlier fund, right, it's nicer to know that they have a specialization in something. And so they bring a little bit of domain knowledge to the table. I think is a powerful thing.
Yeah. So the next question with Karim, I didn't get it. Like LPs coming with approach of philanthropic organization. I've never met anyone like that. But the question is, will they push founders to believe that they can spend our tickets without care?
So Karim, maybe are you basically just saying that like if an LP invests and an LP actually does have some type of impact goal or philanthropic goal, they're worried about the founders they invest into not having that concern?
I think that this is also the first part of the question, because I see that
when a first-time fund manager analyst reaches out cold by email, what specific elements most make an LP actually read and respond? Tone, clarity, thesis, evidence of fit with portfolio track record. Yeah. Maybe this is a separate question, but let's answer this really quick. I think cold outreach and email, you just got to do it at times, right? And I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I also think that like if you're thinking about it as a numbers game in the sense of let me spam as many people as I can, I don't tend to see it being that helpful. I think startups have a better opportunity to do this with VCs. Oh, can we go back to that other question?
Sorry.
Can we bring back up that other question that was up?
I'm trying. Yes.
Okay. So when a startup reaches out to VCs like via their email, that is actually a great way for startup to do that, because those VCs, that's their whole job professionally, is to evaluate as many companies as possible, find good ones to invest into, right? So they should be looking at all of their emails. With LPs, right, a limited partner by definition being limited, right, the idea is that they're not doing this as necessarily their full-time job, right? So when you reach out to them on LinkedIn or email, they might have invested in a fund, they might have invested in a startup, they might have invested in something that's similar to yours. Yours might be better, but they might not even be looking at that moment. They might be busy with fill in the blank other things. So I don't think it's bad to reach out on email or LinkedIn. Just understand that LP, it's not their full-time job. It's not what they're thinking about day in and day out, right? So the more you can get some type of warm intro, the better, right? So the idea of that warm intro is a matter of like, if it's LinkedIn, who are your contacts in between? Who do you know that might be able to at least make an introduction there? I think is definitely a much more helpful way to go. I think people tend to respond to that. I use the phone icon sort of the thing, like where I see somebody that's calling me. If I like them and I'm smiling when they're calling me, I'm very happy they're calling. That's the person I want to work with, right? When it's a person someone is calling me and I don't necessarily want to pick up the phone, that's a pretty good example that maybe it's not something I should be working with, right? But the concept is find people that people smile at when they pick up their phone. I think that's one aspect to that.
Can we move forward?
How do you evaluate sustainability of first-time fund economics, partially around management fee coverage for essential personnel and infrastructure before they achieve the AUM scale of their more established peers? So, I mean, I guess in general, right, most funds are 2 and 20s on average, right? That 2% management fee is in theory covering the cost of that. I don't want to call out any of our GPs that were on our call and were kind enough to join, but I would say that there are a lot of GPs that are all in their own personal financial situations. So I know some GPs that'll pay themselves what I consider a very, very healthy salary in their first-time funds, and I've seen some GPs that will actually take nothing on that, right? And they'll use that management fee to pay their team. And then I've seen other funds where it's a matter of it's only GPs that actually don't have any junior people in the beginning part because they're all doing the work because they're launching their fund. I think all those things work. As an LP perspective, I don't really care too much about that. I think the only example that some would say was that if you build out your team and your whole team is quote unquote very undercompensated, right? Then it's a matter of, are you going to lose team along the way? You're not worried about the GPs, right? Because the GPs are in it for the carry, not for the salary, right? That's also the one thing I would say to every LP out there. When we talk about the 2 and 20 or some variation of the 2 and 20, right? The 2 and 20 is actually a great model, in my opinion. I'm super happy to pay that to the fund managers that I invest with because it aligns our interests really well. Kind of like this question mentions, the 2% keeps the light on, it keeps the team employed and stuff like that. It has office space and all sort of stuff. But the 20% is really why the GPs are in there. And so they only really make, quote unquote, good money when they make you a lot of money. Now, if you are the multi-billion-dollar AUM sort of funds, then you can just live off that AUM, you can live off that management fee, right? And now our incentives get not misaligned, but slightly misaligned, right, from that perspective. So I think it's okay to have those economics from the first-time funds. They're usually bouncing it out. Hey, Rez. Pre-seed, seed startup hires an advisor to raise. Investors expect the founders, GPs in this case, to be face the startup, not advisor this early stage. Yeah, so I saw your comment earlier. So hello over in Malaysia, by the way. So yeah, I mentioned this a little bit during the talk. I think the concept is that advisors are people providing that warm introduction. They're helping you understand the capital raising market in the area that they know very well, right? They provide that warm introduction, maybe keep you company in those meetings and help you track that, maybe even help you with the follow-ups. But for instance, somebody from the US or from Europe flying over to the Middle East or flying over to Asia, sometimes that local advisor might meet with that same person you're meeting with 1, 2, 3, 5 times in between the times that the GP makes it back, right? And so they help kind of keep that warm, so to speak. But in reality, they need to have that GP relationship, that face-to-face. So the more you can make it over, the more you can meet them. I mean, bluntly, one of the reasons why we're putting on the event at the Louvre is because I think the more times people can meet in a non-pitchy session, right, where they're actually meeting and actually getting to know people, enjoying the time together, and knowing who they really are, so the more they feel comfortable with those GPs, right? And so I think those are the kind of the values that we look at.
I like the next question from Asma, and it actually gets us a little bit back to our conversation about partnerships between LP and GP, and probably we can create a list, let's say top 3 signals that definitely shows you that, okay, so that would be a great partnership between LP and GP.
So I mean, there's got to be alignment on there's the hard stuff, right? Like thesis alignment, like do I prefer certain geographies? Do I prefer certain verticals? Do I prefer certain stages, right? Even asset classes, right? So some folks in the Middle East don't want to invest into private credit or even real estate stuff in the US or Europe because it's always going to be leveraged, right? And there's going to be a credit aspect to that. And some people feel that's haram. And very bluntly, there's other families in all around the world, including the Middle East, that are perfectly fine with that as well, right? So there's kind of alignment from that standpoint. I think the idea of feeling always a little bit more both connected, and then I think the most thing is kind of feeling trust, and different people can say how they feel trust, right? But the idea of when you have that trust, and I'm just saying that's the initial signal. Everybody still needs a diligence. Everybody still needs to evaluate and understand those fund managers very extensively. But I think that idea of that first interaction where you have that more positive interaction always just kind of feels a little bit better going forward, right? The LPs always want to feel like they can call a GP up, right, when they have a question, when there's anything along those lines. So I think that what makes it more positive is also that first meeting not being so pitchy, right? When the very first meeting is across an office table and let me show you my slide deck, right, is a very different first meeting than warm introduction from a friend, a more casual setting, a dinner, right? Things like that would be my suggestion.
Great. I think that we probably have 2 more questions. One from Daniel.
Sorry, LP's open to back in merchant. So yeah, Daniel. So are they open to backing new managers with deep experience and understand the startup ecosystem and a different take on how funds could be structured, but they are a first-time fund manager? I would say yes, I've seen people open to that, but I would say the last part of it, the how a fund could be structured, I would always hesitate on that statement. The reason why is because I know quite a few first-time fund managers that have always said, VC is broken, this is a better way to do it. And I've heard that so many times. And usually the people that are saying it don't know. They think it's broken because they've heard enough podcasts. They've heard about how all these like Sequoias are becoming, A16Z is becoming an RIA, right? So obviously the VC model is broken. But that's not really true, right? So Sequoia is going into an RIA. I mean, like these guys are becoming RIAs, or A16Z is becoming an RIA because they're changing their models. And it actually comes back a little bit to the previous question of they're in multi-billion-dollar AUM. Their alignment's very different now, and there's a very different goal behind that, right? And there's a legal aspect in the United States from a crypto perspective and all sorts of stuff that we can get into, right? But the idea of VC is broken is not really true. A lot of great early stage VC funds, right, that are investing, that have a sub $200 million AUM, actively managing it in their vertical, often are outperforming still very, very well, right? And so I think the VC model still works really well. Cyclically, there hasn't been much DPI the last few years, but that's more market related, right? But all that doesn't mean the VC model isn't working well. We're seeing more exits. We're starting to see IPOs again, right? All that stuff I think is good. So I would be really careful when you go to LPs and you pitch that the model or the structure doesn't work, right? This is how it's going to be better. Having said that, I would love to talk to you more. I'd love to learn about the way you're actually, structuring it differently. And we can talk through about from an LP perspective, does that model make sense to me? And, but please educate me if you think that there's a model that is a lot better. So other things I've seen is like evergreen models. I think evergreen's great. It's just super hard to get liquidity in the asset class. So you have a real hard time with people being able to pull their money back out. That's one of the reasons why time to go there. And the idea usually is the management fee / AUM carry aspect, right? And how you align interests. So I think there's a lot of different ways that funds can be structured, but you also do have to realize you'll have to go through an education process with every single conversation you have. Whereas when you're talking to other people and you just say, yep, we're 2 and 20, this is how we operate, that sort of stuff, people kind of already kind of understand that. If you start saying you're a 3 and 30, you're going to have to justify why. If you say you're a 1 and 10, people are going to also, funny enough, wonder why. Because if you're not a 2 and 20 and you're 1 and 10, even though you're charging less, and that sounds wonderful, people are going to wonder why you're not the norm and be like, okay, are they underpaying or whatever else? And really quickly, the underpaying aspect, I think, is also a fallacy, because nowadays so many funds can be so global. You can have people in many different markets, and salaries can vary greatly amongst different markets. So, but yeah, I think there's still potential, but I think you should, chat with more people and see what that feedback is on that different structure.
Let's go. So I have probably just one question, and we probably have just 2 minutes to answer that. It's about government institutions and then how they, how they may affect capital calls.
Sorry, could you say the question again?
Yes, it's on the screen.
Is emerging markets, the LP mix varies. There are a lot of government institutions which might affect capital calls sometimes, and ideas on how to approach this. I don't exactly know what it means by government institutions affect capital calls. I would say that whenever you're balancing out capital calls, right, there's that concept of like, even in your first LPA, right, your limited partner agreement, do you set it out as we're always pulling this much per quarter, it's going to be consistent, we're always pulling this much per year, or we're going to pull it every time we make an investment? The trade-off is usually if I pull it every time I make an investment and get everybody to call, I have to really trust that everybody's writing me that check in, because if anybody misses their check in, I might miss my investment into a company, and that'd be awful for everybody, right? But the concept is matter of like, the reason I do that usually is because I want to keep my IRR as high as possible, because I'm not calling anybody's money until I'm ready to actually put it to work. As opposed to if it's annually and I pull things at the beginning of the year, if I'm sitting on an additional few $1,000,000 and I don't invest in it until November, right, my IRR goes down just because, for lack of better words, I didn't trust everybody to send that check in right away, right? If I pull it quarterly, which is I think probably the thing that some people say, like, well, we're going to be really active, right? And so that way we pull it quarterly, so we know we're planning on making 1 and 2 investments per quarter. The challenge a little bit there is that you kind of have this pressure, like at the end of the quarter, oh, should we invest into this or not? Well, at the end of the quarter, we're getting more cash so soon. So are you investing in companies that are really, really the best, that you have so much conviction in, or is there a little bit of alignment with your capital call strategy? So you don't want like the tail wagging the dog, right? Your capital call strategy shouldn't be driving you to invest into something. But at the same time, people do look at that. So I'm not sure if that's what you mean by this. And then the idea of government institutions, in theory, you can, they have the money, right? But you kind of almost want them to send the cash almost early, because if they miss sending that check over and you miss an investment just because they were slow, that kind of sucks, right? That's pretty, my love of vocabulary sucks. Sorry, but the idea of that concept that government institution might miss that, because also when you have an LPA, right? Yes, that's legally enforceable, but are you ever going to really sue one of your LPs? That's never going to be a great thing, right? They're never going to come back on in your next fund, right? You just became a litigation nightmare. So, it limits your options there. So, yep.
Amazing. I think that brought us to end of our conversation. There is a lot of other questions. I think that we can go over them later, but we just promised to finish in 1.5 hour time. So we really want to be respectful of the time of every single person who is listening to us today. Once again, before we go, we are going to have a webinar in September, also on LinkedIn, with Hub 71, with Audio, and also with RSA, 3 governmental funds that are going to share why UAE is still popular to raise capital. And then the next thing that is happening in October, Chris will be in Dubai, and he is going to present the results of our research and the map. And then you will know what is the best added value family office, and also who is the best GP. And probably that will be not the most famous GP in Emirates.
So we'll
And
be presenting a lot of the results from the Apex Awards as the nominations come in. So that's what we mean by our map of the ecosystem out there.
yes, and then the last is definitely December 5th, Louvre. And please text me and ask any question. I just want to highlight once again that we usually filter out every single person who participates our events. And last time there were so lot of people like consultants, and then a lot of people who we thought that probably will be not the best match for our audience. So really taking care about the quality of people and different funds and LPs who are celebrating with us. And yeah, I think that that's it. I'm super grateful for everyone who participated with us, Christian, Tristan, and Nick. Thank you for being so brave and then active. And then also all the people who asked questions here. And Chris, thank you very much for supporting these ideas and then building all these companies together. And hope to see you on our next webinars.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated. Bye, everyone.
Bye.